Okay. Yeah, you're all right.
Well, welcome to plenary session number 9, the panel discussion of contemplative theology. First of all, I'd like to send a message to Sebastian Mafood, who unfortunately is not with us today, and we want to send him our best wishes and also tell him, oh, it's not on, and also to tell him that we are in fact thinking of him and he is in our prayers. Okay. Now, first of all,
let's do that again. So.
Okay, do you want me to do it again?
Yes.
But this is back.
Yeah.
You were competing with them with a robot, so.
Okay.
You'd like to
We have to bring people inside. Well, first of all, this is panel 9 on contemplative theology.
Let's start it over.
Sitting in kindergarten. Eyes up, hands on the table, sit straight.
Yes. Well, this is going to be a panel on contemplative theology. And first of all, I would like to send a message to Sebastian Mafood, who unfortunately could not be with us today, or indeed for this whole weekend, and to tell him that he is in our thoughts and in our prayers. Okay. So first up is Father Paul Tarasiewicz, who is a member of the Adler Aquinas Institute, and who is also from Poland, where he is a diocesan priest and teaches in a seminary. He also helps with the Holy Apostles College Seminary, and he is going to speak to us now about witness and contemplation.
Thank you very much, Roberta. Hello, everybody. Thank you for choosing this panel, for spending some time in weekend instead of playing golf or some other place, as we heard from Robert. Anyway, the topic is very simple, which I'm going to address, witness and contemplation. But if an ordinary man read through the program of our conference, he might be astonished by his finding. His astonishment would probably be expressed by a question echoing the famous Tertullian's question, what has Romans to do with Jerusalem, but having the following form? What has global peace to do with contemplation? And it would be perfectly understandable, all the more so that contemplation seems to be decidedly alien to the mainstream of modern culture in the West, to our contemporaries dedicated to action, production, results, measurable achievements, rather than to contemplation. That's why I think I should start by explaining the relationship between the terms contemplation present in the title of my paper and the term global peace contained in the title of the conference. To do so, I would like to invoke Joseph Pieper, who in his book Happiness and Contemplation wrote as follows, I quote, in the commentary on Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, Thomas is speaking of politics, which is summation of all man's active cares about securing his existence. The sentence sounds almost utopian, but it is based upon the wholly illusion-free estimate of what is commonly called political me. It contains the insight that politics must inevitably become empty agitation if it does not aim at something which is not political. The whole of political me seems to be ordered with a view to attaining the happiness of contemplation. For peace, which is established and preserved as virtue of political activity, places man in a position to devote himself to contemplation of the truth. End of quote. In other words, peace, which is one of the proper ends of political activity, serves at the same time as a means to practice contemplation, which is, to use Pieper's own words, the goal of man's whole me. And in my opinion, this is the best way I can rationally justify the consideration of contemplation during our conference. Is contemplation really unknown to the Westerners? Although it is possible that most people in the West today would not be able to answer the question about what contemplation is, but fortunately it is not that contemplation is entirely forgotten in Western societies. In the US, for example, there are some individuals, some groups particularly interested in recovering contemplation for the good of the whole nation. What do they mean by contemplation? There are some for whom contemplation is a synonym for deep analytical thought. For instance, Jessie Manisto, in her article, Restoring Contemplation, How Disconnecting Bolsters the Knowledge Economy, quotes Thomas J. Watson, former CEO of IBM Corporation, who already 100 years ago aptly noted that, I quote, "The trouble with every one of us is that we don't think enough. Thought has been the father of every advance since time began. I didn't think has cost the world millions of dollars," he said. And Jesse L. Manisto believes that since the United States of America has a knowledge-based economy, American citizens with the capacity to think deeply should be regarded as one of its most precious natural resources. Doing my research, I also came across an information about the Center for Contemplative Mind in Society, the center having its station in Northampton, Massachusetts. Their objective is to promote contemplative practices. What do they mean by contemplative practices? As they explain, they use the phrase contemplative practice to refer to any activity undertaken regularly with the intention of quieting the mind and cultivating deep concentration, calm, and awareness of present moment. Contemplative practices can include many forms of single-minded concentration, such as meditation, journal writing, mindful movement such as yoga, tai chi, and dance, prayer, mindful reading, experiences in nature, artistic practices such as poetry, music, and spoken word, and form of social activism in a context of mindfulness. What is surprising in this presentation is a variety of forms contemplation takes on to live in the West today. Taking, however, the advantage of this already existing interest in contemplation, I would like to introduce a new approach to it. Its newness consists in using contemplation in its philosophical, non-religious sense in order to strengthen Christians who, by bearing witness about their faith, are engaged in dialogue with the modern multicultural world. I would like us to remember that Christianity is a special religion. It is such because it belongs to the elitist, exclusive group of three universal religions beside Buddhism and Islam. And that to be a universal religion means to address a universal message to all the people of the world, of the earth, in order to encourage them to become followers of it. In the case of Christians, being a witness is a basic means of realizing the universality of Christianity. Thus, being a Christian witness can be defined by two parallel factors, which are confirmation of the faith and attraction to the faith. First, as a confirmation of faith, witness plays a significant role in our religious experience. It is so because faith in Jesus Christ, not only as a belief, but also as an inner force confirmed by deeds, is the first principle of gospel, and as such is necessary for our salvation. Witness, therefore, becomes a major source of motivation in our life and has a significant impact on our conduct. Second, the purpose of Christian witness is to attract people to believe in Christ. About 40 years ago, Blessed Pope Paul VI put a special emphasis on bearing witness by Christians saying that, I quote, "Modern man listens more willingly to witnesses than to teachers. And if he does listen to teachers, it is because they are witnesses." And he also adds, "It is therefore primarily by her conduct and by her life that the church will evangelize the world. In other words, by her living witness of fidelity to the Lord Jesus, the witness of poverty and detachment, of freedom in the face of the powers of this world, in short, the witness of sanctity," end of quote. We know it from our experience that the authentic witness of faith always intrigues and stimulates reflections. Our witness is often the only chance to encounter the gospel, especially for those people who are biased or neutral to religion, who are captivated by consumerism or permeated by relativism. Modern society, however, is rather unfavorable to living the Christian faith and giving witness regardless the circumstances. Living in modern societies often requires compromises, and compromises always undermine Christian integrity. The pragmatism of life seems to suggest pretending instead of being a witness instead of being a witness. As if the modern world neglected the warning of Plato from his Republic. I'm sure you remember the part of Plato's discussion on justice, wherein the interlocutor of Socrates cites the argument of the eulogies of injustice, the argument which is to show that to be a just is not profitable. This is a quotation. They will tell you that the just man who is thought unjust will be scourged, racked, bound, will have his eyes burned out, and at last, after suffering every kind of evil, he will be impaled. Then he will understand that he ought to seem only and not to be just. For the unjust is pursuing a reality. He does not live with a view to appearances. He wants to be really unjust and not to seem only, end of quote. In the light of these words and in the rules of modern society, it seems that to be the authentic witness does not pay off. The authentic witness seems to entail the lack of success in the worldly life. For indeed, on the account of unfavorable cultural environment, many Christians give up on authentic witness in the interest of a false witness. What is false witness like? The nature of the false testimony consists in the dishonesty of the witness. It is defined as a deliberate lie on the part of the witness and an attack on justice, which is the foundation of human relationships. Falsifying the testimony often results from conformist attitudes which weave elements of theatrical acting into the reality of social life. Already the ancients made the objections against the practice of theatrical acting as such. What they objected to was the power possessed by actors who, while performing, consciously or unconsciously, to awaken the dormant passions of the audience and thus to contribute to lower the standards of social morality. Polish writer Czesław Miłosz, in his essay, The Captive Mind, while describing the way people lived under communism, discerningly notes that acting on the stage of life is different from acting in the theater. In life, everyone can act in front of all the others and knows that all the others can act in front of him too. Conscious acting in everyday life, when practiced long enough, can lead to such an accurate identification with the role that the acting person can no longer distinguish between his real self and a character he plays. The identification of the man with the role can reach the point at which the behavior associated with the role appears automatically and pretends to be an authentic way of living. But is this at the peak of the false testimony? It seems that the ideal of the false religious witness is an attitude called Ketman, whose term is derived from Persian and means to hide, to camouflage. In the Islamic tradition, Ketman means the exception to the observance of religious laws in the situation of coercion, of threat, which allows even a feigned renunciation of the faith. Joseph Arthur de Gobineau, in his book entitled Religions and Philosophies in Central Asia, while describing the phenomenon of Ketman, distinguishes two of its phases. The first of these takes on a form of silence and is caused by dealing with cruel persecutors of the faith, which requires counseling one's identity and avoiding to be a witness for the sake of prudence. According to people in Muslim East, Gobineau writes, the holder of the truth should practice Ketman in order to not expose his person, his property, and his respect to the blindness, madness, and malice of those powerful enemies of God, whom God himself is pleased to mislead and maintain in error. The second Ketman phase occurs when avoiding testimony is not enough, when silence, continues Gobineau, no longer suffices, when it may pass as an avowal. Then one must not hesitate. Not only must one deny one's true opinion, but one is commanded to resort to all ruses in order to deceive one's adversary. One makes all the protestation of faith that can please him. One performs all the rites one recognizes to be the most vain. One falsifies one's own books. One exalts all possible means to deceit. Doing so, one obtains great satisfaction and merit for getting himself protected, for preserving his precious faith from the horrible contact with the infidels, and finally, for covering the infidels with shame and spiritual poverty, which they deserve. Both Ketman phases are joined with the experience of satisfaction flowing from applying this attitude. Ketman, concludes Gobineau, fills the man who practices it with pride. Thanks to it, a believer raises himself to a permanent state of superiority over the man he deceives, be he a minister of state or a powerful king. To him who uses Ketman, the other is a miserable blind man, whom one shuts off from the true path, whose existence he does not suspect. While you, tattered and dying of hunger, trembling externally at the feet of a duped force, your eyes are filled with light, you walk in brightness before your enemies. It is an unintelligent being that you make sport of. It is a dangerous beast that you disarm. What a wealth of pleasures. Living the modern society which accepts compromises and false witnesses is a sufficient reason, I think, to start looking for a remedy. In my opinion, the remedy we need consists in the reinforcement of a Christian witness by giving him a natural support for his religious belief. Such a natural support would be given by philosophy, and its function would be complementary to that performed by the supernatural support of God. God strengthens a man to bear authentic witness by granting him a special grace. This grace can take different forms. Among this, besides religious faith, there is also mystical vision. Mystical experience provides a man with a certain information about God's essence, but what is the most important, I think, it deprives him of any doubts concerning God's existence. The man who became a mystic does not need any proof that God exists, because God's existence was exactly what he experienced during his mystical vision. One of those who built their philosophical assertions on mysticism was Henri Bergson. The testimony of the mystics was, in the eyes of Bergson, the strongest confirmation of the arguments for the existence of God. When the mystics testify in unison of their knowledge of the existence of God as a lived experience, the only adequate explanation is, in the words of the Bergson, the real existence of the being with whom they believed themselves in communication. Even Bertrand Russell confirms the connection of mysticism with certainty, saying that, I quote, "The mystic insight begins with the sense of a mystery unveiled, of a hidden wisdom now suddenly become certain beyond possibility of a doubt," end of quote. It is that we can get rid of doubts concerning our faith only by means of mysticism. Is it that nobody but mystics can be authentic witness? What I want to say here is that there is a complementary way to strengthen our certitude in faith and so fortify our testimony. The name of this way is contemplation. Let me use the words of Father Reginald Garrigou-Lagrange to explain what kind of contemplation we need to support our faith. He writes as follows, I quote, "Contemplation in general, such as may exist in a non-Christian philosopher, for example, in Plato or Aristotle, is a simple intellectual view of the truth superior to reasoning and accompanied by admiration. Simplex intuitus veritatis, as St. Thomas Aquinas says in his Summa. An example of this contemplation is the admiring knowledge of that supreme truth of philosophy, namely that at the summit of all composite and unchangeable beings, there exists absolutely simple and immutable being itself, the principle and end of all things. It has not received existence. It is of itself existence, truth, wisdom, goodness, love. Just as in the physical order, light of itself is light and has no need to be illumined, just as heat of itself is heat. Reason by itself, own strength, with the natural help of God, may rise to this contemplation, says Garrigou-Lagrange. In other words, contemplation refers to a total devotion to revealing, clarifying, and making manifest the natural contact with reality, the nature of reality. Its focus is the pursuit of truth and nothing less. As Joseph Pieper clearly discerns, I quote, the first element of the concept of contemplation is the silent perception of reality. This, he claims, is a form of knowing arrived at not by thinking, but by seeing, by intuition, which is without doubt the perfect form of knowing. For intuition is knowledge of what is actually present. The parallel to seeing with the senses is exact, he says. In the conclusion, I would like to formulate a hypothesis, that is, that it is exactly witness based on contemplation, which can effectively help us to overcome the crisis of the Christian world marked by the weakness of the testimony. For contemplation can give us a similar certitude in faith to that given by mystical vision. And even though St. Thomas Aquinas would say that the truth about God, such as reason could discover, would not be known by a few, and that after a long time and with the admixture of many errors, it does not mean to me that knowing God by contemplating his works is not possible at all. This possibility, though requiring a lot of work, a lot of commitment, seems to me an open doorway for doing philosophy that we Christians need most. Thank you very much for your attention.
will move on to Bill McVeigh's paper and then have questions at the end. Bill McVeigh needs no introduction. But anyway, he is experienced in the temporal realms and knowledgeable in the spiritual realms, and thus makes a very fine discussant at our meetings. But now he is going to speak now on why the contemporary world sorely needs ragamuffin scholastic contemplatives.
Robert, I was inspired. My life will never be the same again.
Neither will mine. Go ahead.
I put it in brackets. And we have a thing going. I've decided to become a phenomenologist because it's the only way I'm going to get on the Oprah show, because I was watching Marion, the phenomenologist, and he had this unbelievable charm, bow tie and the whole thing. And he was lecturing at Villanova, and I just read his book on St. Augustine. And he had a phrase that I just thought, boy, this is so cool. The saturated phenomena. I thought when I'm talking to business guys, I'll say, guys, I can sense it, the saturated phenomena. Let's go for it. It's there. We can touch it. So I realized that being a phenomenologist, you get a few words down, and then you make your own language up, and you're pretty acceptable. And that's what's going on today. So I think that's the direction of my next career. Before I give this paper, let me give you, I think a little background is important. I didn't plan to come here and give two papers because I get fed up listening to myself talk, okay? And but Peter, I said, look, Bill, I want you to give two papers. Because I sent this paper to Peter, and this is where it was given. I was invited to speak to the Unity Church. They were having a conference on contemplation. Now, who's Unity? They're maybe a step up from the Unitarians, right? They're big in California area. And I play in a jazz quartet. I had a jazz quartet, and my bass player, he was a professor there. Okay? And I had 4 years before that spoken there. I just had written a book on existentialism and Christian Zen. And I'm not even a Jesuit. I still wrote a book on Christian Zen. And it was really a crazy thing. And I was doing weird stuff, and I was coming back to Thomas, and I had this discussion group going, on. I was doing a lot of Buddhist psychology because I counsel and work with a lot of drunks and addicts, and Buddhist psychology was working out much better working with them than Western models of psychology. So I was doing a course on the relationship of Buddhist psychology, Heidegger, and the Via Negativa. And it was getting pretty well attended. And I found a publisher and just put my notes together, and the book sold fairly well. So they invited me out there to speak at this conference, and they didn't have a clue what I was talking about, because when these were all these mystical, naturalist, spiritualist contemplatives, but they all got mad at me, okay? And so they asked me to come back a second time a few years later. I said, why do you want me to come back? Because you're just going to get, but we like you, okay? We like to get mad at you, okay? And so I put my suit and collar on to really agitate them, okay? So this is my form of evangelism, really get them angry at you. And so when I gave this paper, I'd come back to Thomism, okay? And my life had been ruined by Peter Radpath over there at that stage. So the reason it was interesting, I got to make a comment on what somebody said about Buddhism. The Buddha gave up on all forms of meditation. He tried the methodical approach to meditation, the systematic approach to mysticism, the Bernard Lonergan approach, the methods of meditation, the methods of mysticism, this layer, that layer, you finish this, then you go to the next level and so forth. And he tried that, and it didn't work. So being a ragamuffin, he decided to do something simple. He found a tree that he liked. I'll keep that metaphor in mind because I'm going to come back to the metaphor of the tree. And he sat under it. And he just sat under it till he got an answer, till he was enlightened. And he had the big answer. He said, all my life, I've suffered and been trying to escape pain. And I have been enlightened that every other human, if I have been that way, then every other human being has been the same way. They need sympathy. They need compassion. That's the fundamental basis. And on all the moral teachings of Buddhism, and there are various types of Buddhists, come under that. That is the fundamental basis of enlightenment and mindfulness and so forth. I suffer, humanity suffers. I must extend compassion. So I'm thinking of writing a paper. I don't know if I can pull this off. Francis, the Zen Pope. I see that same type of spiritual movement in that man. That's just an aside. I came back into the priesthood, the Anglican priesthood. As I gave my paper last year, some of you know, after being an alcoholic in AA for 22 years, that's where my spirituality came from. And I said to my wife, the problem with going back into the priesthood is you have to be holy. And I'm not very good at that. I'm a ragamuffin. And that's the Protestant side in me. I'm a ragamuffin. And what's a ragamuffin? Let me give a metaphor. And Brennan Manning wrote a lot of books. He was an ex-Franciscan. And it's beautiful stuff he writes, but it's very Protestant. It's very much justification by great faith alone. But the ragamuffin in Kansas City, one of the plush areas of Kansas City, is the plaza. And down at the plaza, you always have the homeless people. There's one guy that's always standing there with a sign. I need food just for today. He's a ragamuffin. He's a beggar on the street corner. And every morning when I wake up, I try to see myself and picture myself as that person standing on the street corner in front of Christ and calling upon the Holy Spirit as a ragamuffin. Because my spirituality and my contemplation is one day at a time. Without grace, I can't do it to get through the day. So that's very much in my thinking when I come back. I had to have those painful experiences to learn what contemplation was all about. The most difficult person I ever tried to counsel with an alcohol problem was a Benedictine nun who taught at Catholic U. I can't give the name away, okay? It was almost impossible to touch her because she would intellectualize everything. You know, and the hardest people to work with, professors and lawyers and intellectuals, are very hard to, you know, that's why I used a lot of Buddhist psychology to calm them down. Just calm them down and get the ideas out of their head. As Robert was talking, I was thinking, I was flying into Los Angeles, flying business class and going to a client, and this Silicon Valley type of guy came in with the earphones and stuff, and they sat beside me. And, you know, hey, dude, how are you? So I'm going to a meeting. And we got talking. It's amazing when you fly in a plane, especially sometimes in business class, where you meet a complete stranger and they get probably more intimate with the stranger than anybody else. You ever notice that? You will share more with a complete stranger sometimes than members of your own family. And he did, because the stewardess said, would you like to have? And he said, 3 Jack Daniels and a bottle of Jack Pepper. Black, what was that? Boston pepper, huh? Okay, whatever it was. I said, whoa, this is, my old days supposed to be my kind of guy, okay? I said, we would never have made LA. I mean, God knows where we'd ended up in Budapest or something, you know? But, so we got talking. He said, hey, man, you know, I'm pulling my stuff together. I've been through 4 rehab centers. And I said, well, the Jack Daniel helping here? He said, that's not my problem. It was cocaine. So I can have a few drinks now and then. 3 Jacks and something to wash it down with on the plane flying. You know, he closed the bar almost, you know. And I said, well, you know, I used to have a problem like yours, but I found a higher power. Hey, man, don't get into that stuff, okay? I tried that AA stuff. Really, and I said, well, you know, nothing wrong with God. He said, I'm into God. I'm a spiritual person, not religious, but I'm spiritual. But it's not the big G God. It's the small G God. You know, I thought, okay, and that's it. Responding to Robert's, but that's where I think people are today. C.S. Lewis called it theological minimalism. You know, there is a God, but he's a teeny weeny bitsy God, okay? And I'm into him, and I'm willing to, that's cocktail party conversation, or we'll watch Oprah once in a while. So I think the problem is that we are into a society of theological minimalism that C.S. Lewis called it. I'm not into the big G. I'm into the little God. And I think contemplatives are very much into the big G God. And there's something all-absorbing once you discover the big G God. Now, today, people are not only rejecting Christianity. You have to understand this. Once upon a time, the missionaries came here with a message that nobody had heard. They came to Europe and they spread it. But today, in Western civilization, we have heard the message of Christianity. We've accepted it and we've rejected it. This country was held together in Protestantism by the Great Crusades. The Great Crusades worked the Great Awakenings because people knew something about the gospel. They knew something about Christianity. Sociologists now tell us that probably about only 18% of our population now will ever have had a religious experience. I remember teaching courses and people with kids, students say to me, what do you mean by this thing, ultimate concern? It was way beyond their comprehension. So what is happening is they're not just rejecting Christianity, they are immunizing themselves against it. Say, hey, come on, guy, I don't want to talk. I had that, been there, done that. I took a shot, I'm over it, okay? I've been immunized against any religious conversations whatsoever. So what does that mean? The only answer is that we have to go very, very deep within ourselves, okay? It's like in marriage counseling. The kids are messed up. A smart therapist says, I've got to work with the parents. They got to be changed. So before we think about all kind of techniques of bringing them back to church, we have to be very, very deep within ourselves as Christians. So they find something extremely powerful and miraculous and compassionate in us, out of the ordinary, that draws them into this community. And that's what I think we have to become, ragamuffin contemplatives. We are street beggars begging for grace, who at the same time have had extraordinary experiences of the risen Christ in our life, who has saved us and taken us from pain. I know you all look nice and clean here. You're all healthy, happy, integrated people. You're here at Huntington, very educated, but like me, you have pain. You have questions, you have confusion, you have ragamuffin suffering. That's what I think contemplative. So let me get into my paper. Okay.
And we're out of time, thank you.
There are three priests who die and they go to purgatory. Okay. A Jesuit, a Dominican, and a Franciscan. Fran O'Rourke gave me this story, one of the most brilliant Thomists I know, so it's got to be true. I'm kind of embellishing a bit. So they go to purgatory. And eventually, after some time in purgatory, they're taking the shuttle bus to heaven, okay? And they meet one another for the first time, the Dominican, the Jesuit, and the Franciscan, and they say, what do you think about it? And the Franciscan says, you know, I tried the best and the hardest to find the goodness down there and the upside. Very upbeat spirituality. And the Dominican said, I loved the discipline and the pain and the suffering that went on here. And the Jesuit said, you know, I spent most of my time negotiating for two of my friends, Bernard Lonergan and Karl Rahner, trying to get them out of here earlier, okay? So up they go to heaven, and St. Peter comes to meet them at the pearly gates. And they said, is it now, do we get the beatific vision? He said, not yet. He said, not yet. He said, you know, I'm kind of restructuring heaven. And as you know, if you've read scripture, you must know that I'm a pretty, all due respect to some of the people here, a pretty pragmatic guy. And I put a few new techniques in here. I want to start a reward system up here before you get the beatific vision. And I want to give very special attention because I've got a lot of respect for you guys that dedicated your lives to the religious order. So I'm going to give you a wish for a week, and then we'll move on to the next phase. So he says to the Dominican, what's your wish? He said, I would do anything to spend some time with St. Dominic, to sit there and watch him in prayer. You know, just, you got it. And he says to the Franciscan, what would you like? Oh, just to be with Franciscan and sit there and observe him and watch him, you know, feed the animals and talk to the children. And and he says to the Jesuit, what would you like? And the Jesuit says, I would just love for a week to spend time with the Holy Family in Nazareth. He says, you got it. So after about a week, Peter goes back to see how they're doing. Are they ready for the next phase? And the Dominican is there with his hands full and listening to every word that St. Dominic is saying, and the tears are rolling down his cheeks. And it's just, you know, oh, He goes to see the Franciscan, and he's talking to St. Francis, and the joy and the feeling of happiness, and just serendipity is wonderful. And then he sees the Jesuit sitting with the Holy Family in Nazareth, and there's Mary and Joseph and Jesus playing on the floor. And the Jesuit has his arms around Joseph, and he's saying, I understand that you'll have a son going to college pretty soon. There have been, I think, in the West, two basic institutional approaches to what most of us Christians, I try to explain this to the Unitarians, and they couldn't quite get it, to contemplation, which is, I think our concept of contemplation, to understand it, I think you understand it comes from the concept that the Greeks gave us, this concept of leisure. I think Mark's going to be probably touching upon that in his talk. And I think, as Pieper says, the concept of leisure was, we are not at leisure in order to be at leisure. There's something else. So if I could paraphrase that, I work to contemplate, and I contemplate to work. But today in our society, that has been changed radically. I work to play. I work, and if I really work hard enough and play enough, I stand a chance of becoming more than a ragamuffin. I become somewhat of an elite. I can travel. I can play fantasy football. I can be a man of leisure, which becomes the new American dream. I am recognized. That's the purpose of working hard today, and to get an early retirement and out as quickly as possible, to dedicate my life to leisure. And the big thing that sociologists tell us is growing to is called volunteer work or activity. It's called vol work when they calculate the total number of hours that people are going to work. So leisure, we don't know how to handle. I think that's where the monasticism faced sociologically, existentially, this issue of leisure. And out of that, we had two traditions grow, I think, in the concept of contemplation, what I would call the monastic and the scholastic tradition. Of course, the monastic tradition would be the religious orders and so forth, but I would like to suggest a category, it was Sebastian Mayfield that put me onto this, of the scholastic tradition, what I would call the Aristotelian to mystic tradition of speculare, which means to look at the world, to observe, to behold, and to contemplate. It's a receptive contemplation that observes the indelibility of God in creation and creatures. It is in the practice of scholastic contemplation, the world is viewed as something worthy of reverence and wonder. That's what the nuns have to hear. This is a world worthy of wonder, and it's way beyond the capabilities of science. For scholastic contemplation, divine and mystical truth rests upon the belief that the real wealth of humankind lies not in the satisfaction of the necessities of becoming lords and masters of creation, as much as understanding by study, meditation, and prayer the whole of what is. It is by means of the intellect touching the intelligible whole that the contemplative is led to a journey towards the beatific vision by prayer, study, and worship. Let me read this little passage and I'll apply it personally to my life. Thomas Aquinas, in his commentary on Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, describes the purest form of speculare rather succinctly, I think, in the description of two philosophers. When Thales was leaving the house to look at the stars, he fell into a ditch. While he was bewailing the fact, an old woman remarked to him, "Oh, Thales, can you not see at your feet, and you expect to see what is in the heaven? How can you understand heaven if you can't understand the world? How can you even hope to contemplate?" An old guy in AA once said to me, Shep Wankin, you talk about a street phenomenologist. He said, "Bill, God doesn't work unless Jesus has skin." What's at your feet? Compassion, mercy is all part, I think, of these are things that the world is looking for now. But that's the problem in my house, because Linda will say to me, "What are you doing?" I'm downstairs contemplating. "Take the garbage out. Take care of the yard." This, Linda, you just don't understand me. So I'm not a monk. I'm a guy that finds it hard to be holy. I'm retired now. I'm looking for my next business deal to get into, you know. That kind of preoccupies my mind, and yet I'm trying to be contemplative and Thomistic at the same time.
How's that working out for you?
It's not good we're going too well. Anaxagoras, though noble and wealthy, left his family possessions to his relatives and devoted himself to the investigation of the natural phenomena, taking no interest in civic affairs. I'm beyond it all. Okay, I'm giving up. Neither party works. It's all nonsense. I'm going to become a neo-Boltmanian or something like that, you know. I'm waiting for the second coming of Jesus. I'm giving up on this thing. With these, we got a criminal and a madman running for president. I'm just going to stare at heaven. I'm sitting in my basement again. You know? What are you doing? I'm looking out the window thinking about God. Honey, do something practical. See, my wife is a very devout Calvinist, Presbyterian. And she isn't by the predestination thing, but now she's an evangelical Methodist. I retire, and it's the first week of my retirement, and she says to me, I'd like to have lunch with you. Now, when your wife says to you with that, I'd like to have lunch with you, oh, Jesus. I don't drink anymore, and I'm trying to be good, and I go to church, and she wants to have lunch with me. What's wrong? No, just I want to have lunch with you. So we go to lunch, and she sits there, and she looks across the table with a very deep view, and my knees are starting to, and she says, now you're retired. What are you going to get? What's going to be your ministry? What are you going to get volunteer? What are you going to get into? Well, so I'm kind of working with Peter in this comp, and I'm writing some articles, and I contemplate. No. What's your ministry? How does that relate to the Beatitudes? You know, you understand, I have an evangelical Protestant wife who thinks Pope Francis is her Pope. You know, she's a Calvinist. This stuff here, she thinks you're all from Haiti doing voodoo, okay? It freaks her out, okay? And, you have to understand that there's people out there that look at this like, this is, like Peter said last year, this is the smoke of hell coming up in here, you know?
She's not going to watch this video.
No. But St. Francis writes an article on the environment. Read that. The Pope said it. It has to be. St. Francis makes a comment on gays or marriages. Read that, Bill. This guy is great. He's our Pope, the Pope of the world. He's compassionate. He's compassionate. He's looking in the heavens, but he's also looking at his feet at the same time. Let me skip a lot here to go to the key. Here's my view of metaphysics, and it doesn't come from anything as lofty as reading the Summa. Brevity is wit, and that wasn't St. Thomas's strong point. And I mean, the guy was making his living writing stuff with students, and I used to when I was at SPSS, we used to have a software system that could take written volumes and parse it and summarize it down to a certain number of pages. And it would be interesting to get a grant to take that and do it on the Summa to see if we can get it down to 100 pages of what it really is saying. I'm serious. I mean, I don't think it'd be 100 pages, but we would do a pretty good job on it. But so I get it from the Nicomachean Ethics. I want something that's, Peter and I keep saying, it's really behavioral anthropology. That's where this whole metaphysics thing came from. They looked at people. So I said, why wouldn't contemplation come from that? And so I was reading through the Nicomachean Ethics, and I began to see, wait a minute, when I retired and I became an Anglican priest, my attempt to get back to the contemplative life initially was to go what's called the Protestant hour a day. The Protestant hour a day is to dedicate your life every day to an hour of scripture reading, spiritual reading, and prayer. It's called the Protestant hour. That's the Reformed version of a contemplative. In AA, in the 11th step, on a daily basis, you must seek God through prayer, meditation, and examination of conscience on a daily basis. So I had to take this seriously. But I read this in the Nicomachean Ethics. I said, that's me. I'm a guy of the world. I've been in business and so forth. And this, so I'm going to read it, makes sense to me. So here's, I think, the 10 points of what a scholastic contemplative is about. The contemplative person has discovered the road to extreme and lasting pleasure is the experience of joy that comes in the pursuit of wonder, the ultimate good, desirable goods, and the experience of God in study, prayer, and virtuous habits. So at Robert's Spa, we would advertise it. Would you like to discover the extreme and lasting pleasures and experience of joy of life at Roberto's Spa? We're all with all certified counselors here to work with you on a one-to-one basis. The contemplative person is engaged in a habit that can never have an excess because a person is never satisfied with a limited participation in the divine truth. I want to stop on that word habit for a second. Here's what I experienced when I was a pastor. Father, this is the greatest book ever written on spirituality or meditation. This is it. This is the best one I've read since last week. That's what we're coming to. This is the best book on meditation and contemplation since last week. 3, the contemplative person comes to realize that in all states of personal, interpersonal, and environmental chaos, he or she remains in a state of rest, stability, and delight. As the Buddhists would say, you turn off the monkey brain. My simple mantra is, I teach people would come to me, I used to carry a prescription pad. And the guy from saying, look, Father, the IRS is after me. I got a DUI impending and my wife wants to divorce me. What should I do? We know the answer. Say, well, here, I have a prescription pad. I'm going to give you that. Now, you got to do this all week. Do it every day. You have to read Psalm 46, especially line 1, say it slowly and breathe it. And then he says, well, okay, I mean, you want me to do that? That's too long. I said, okay, I'll change it for you. Say this all day, 100 times each day. Let go and let God, but say it slowly and breathe it. Okay, you have to do it. And then next week, we'll start problem solving. No, please. So he does it and he comes back. He said, I want to see you in 7 days. See how you feel. Like a doctor, because Jesus was a healer. You see, if I'm developing my metaphysical spiritual techniques. So okay, so he takes it. He kind of walks up mumbling. So he comes back next week to meet me. I said, well, did you follow the prescription? Hey, I tried it for a couple of days and I felt better after that, so I stopped taking it. He had calmed down. The habit of meditation. You see, that's the hard. That's why people can't be. My students used to, when I was teaching, they used to do all kind of study of Zen Buddhism and so forth. But the thing they didn't realize, if you want to do Zen meditation, they beat the tar out of you. One of the things they do in Zen is he gives you these koans to solve, the Zen master. So go off and solve this, like what the dead, a good Christian one is, let the dead bury the dead. Now, can you imagine watching a grieving wife coming in to see me and her husband has just died? She says, Father, the grief is killing me. What do you say? Let the dead bury the dead. Meditate on that for a week and come back and see me. That way teaching in seminaries? No, just try it. So that's what it's the habit, though. The habit. So that in Zen, they give him a koan to solve, and they say, you got 2 weeks to solve this thing, come back and see me. And he comes back, and the Zen master says, that's the dumbest answer I've ever heard in my life. I mean, they let you into the temple with that kind of, you go back, it's ridiculous. You're an idiot. Get out of here. Just work on it. Do some serious meditation. The guy keeps on coming back for months. And he said, well, now, can you give me an answer, a visual answer to this koan? Kind of deep down to the deep metaphor, deep structures of the brain, the soul. He comes back and says, all right, you've got it. The habit. If it gets too complicated, if you read the meditations and prayer, people like Brother Lawrence, okay, on the daily basis, that's what begins to really, on a daily thing, open up the soul and gives us stability and delight. 4, I'll go. The contemplative person perceives the truth as an agent of truth. It is contemplation of truth as a suprasensible that most defines a person and makes you a person. The contemplative person finds that a life of virtuous activity gives pleasure that is permanent, immaterial, and unchangeable. It is a pleasure beyond changeable objects the changeable objects are not lasting, but contemplative pleasure is. The contemplative person investigates the truth and reflects on the divine truth already discovered and known. The contemplative person becomes more perfect in wisdom because contemplation of truth is an entirely internal activity. It is by means of struggling alone that a deep sense of calm is achieved where one knows much rather than passing opinions. Now that's important, I want to stress that. When I gave this talk to these Unitarian types, Of all the things I said that upset them, they all come up after and said, but Father, you had one great point in there. It was this thing you said, say that again to me about passing opinions. They said, that's all we get in our seminaries here. Everybody's got an opinion of the day. It's from this opinion to that. The other day I was laughing, we were talking about, critical thinking. The concept of critical thinking in university days, critical thinking is you will think the way I'm thinking. That's basically what every professor is saying at these meetings when they try to come together. Critical thinking has become the art of passing opinions around, well-formed opinions. Contemplation, I love that passage. Rather than passing opinions, the stability of what I believe in is deep, deep. And it isn't just expressed in words. It's expressed in how I walk, how I talk, how I cry for people, how I hold their hands, how I nurse them at death, and so forth. That's to me, ragamuffin contemplation. The contemplative person, however, seeks out the contemplative of fellow spiritual workers because one needs a person who is perhaps wiser. I came here, I'm sitting with a young man, Thomas, over there. I said, where are you from? Catholic you? No, and I said, how'd you hear about us? Did you find us online? So we got talking, and he was in seminary, and he left, and he's now in his second year of physics. And I said, Then he said, I got a group started. Where do you live again? So he said, and we started off, I got a few people, and we started off reading a book by Gilson, and it was too heavy. Then we did a thing by Adler. They really liked that, so they could get into it. And now I'm doing the book by Joseph Pieper, which I find in study groups always really gets the first thing entry. You want to get people into Thomism. That one seems to work. And I said to him, how many people you got in your little group that you started? He said, 20 to 30. In the old days, when I was Roman Catholic, we used to talk about the church should be something like the Communist Party. We should have worker cells of people. Remember that movement? Catholic Action Program. How about the Contemplative Action Program? Now, the Holy Spirit's brought me here. The Holy Spirit sent Thomas here. That's all. That's the Holy Spirit. The Contemplative Action Group going. The old Catholic Action Program, I think. So I said to him, next year, why don't you come back and bring all your 20 or 30 buddies with you here, and we'll see what happens. I need friends. That's why I come here, and you come here. My wife says, where are you going? So I'm going to Thomistic camp, where I play with everybody. We play with ideas, and then we get to the real important stuff at night at the cocktail hour. And that's where you act like Episcopalians, because wherever you have 4 Episcopalians, you have a 5th. So. 9, the contemplative person knows that happiness is desirable in itself. Therefore, it is obvious that happiness consists in contemplation most of all. And finally, the contemplative person is occupied in contemplation, not sees that life is composed of diverse elements, but we're not just atomistic, but as something divine is present in him, me as a person. Metaphysics is great, but it ain't worth a hoot if it's not dynamic. Remember that joke I told the other day? Metaphysics is like the GPS system, and the guy in Maine who's lost and can't find where he's going, he doesn't have a GPS. What's the use of metaphysics if it's not dynamic and it's not existential? You're in this, that's what I keep on saying, you've gone into the sandbox to talk with one another and play games. Jesus has to have skin. It has to touch. It has to touch us. There's no large movement of monasteries today. Our monasteries are empty. But let me come back to the existential part of this. I'll finish with this story. From Scripture, 1 John. Jesus picks Nathaniel and John because he is a contemplative person and seeker. He has questions, but he asks them honestly. He simply states, I don't quite get it. Now, in evangelism, I'm not going to waste my time with people, and Adler wrote on this somewhere, in this book on how to talk about God. Don't go after seekers who have immunized themselves. You're wasting your time. At best, you'll have a little intellectual argument, and it might be, but that's just I'm from marketing, okay? In marketing, it's very important to have access and accessibility, target marketing. Know who you're going after, how to address them, and how to find accessibility and meet them and where to talk with them. So that's why your spa, and all joking aside, is interesting of people. Okay, And so you want the person who says, I don't quite get it. You know, my life isn't fitting together and I'm really looking, right? You know, that's not the person who's still using all their spare time so they can get the yacht someday and act like an elite, okay? That's not going to work there until they have a lot of pain. Take enough cocaine, they'll come around after a while. Nathaniel asks sincere questions. You look for the person asking sincere questions. He is not intellectually arrogant or boastful, a boastful know-how of it all. He is a decent person. I mean, I came back into Christianity because I didn't want to be a saint. I just wanted to be a good guy for a change. I wanted to be a decent person. That was the paper I gave last year. You have to have good orderly direction in your life before you can even think seriously about meditation or contemplation. Nathaniel seeks sincere answers. He is not arrogant. He is a decent person. He is one who engages in an open and heartfelt, decent conversation with others in Jesus. Jesus allows him to hesitate in his decision when you're ready. When you're ready. Jesus knows that he is confused because he is unaware that Jesus was born in Bethlehem. He said, you can't be Jesus. You're not supposed to, where's this Bethlehem connection? But Jesus is patient. He hasn't got the details right. He doesn't know all the dogma completely. He can understand parts of it here and there, but he doesn't have to have it all figured out yet. He doesn't have to all have it. Jesus is patient, and he lovingly allows the orator scholar to hesitate in his decision. As Nathaniel is moved towards his conversation experience, he asks Jesus, here's the big existential question. How do you know me? How can you read my heart so well? How do you know my pain? How do you know my questions? And Jesus answers, I saw you while you were still under the fig tree before Philip called you. And Jesus says, I saw you as a sincere seeker under the fig tree. Now, if we are contemplative, we will automatically spot the sincere seeker and begin the conversation. But we must go deep within ourselves first in order to build a spiritual existential relationship with anybody. Otherwise, it'll be a head trip. The fig tree was known as the cursed tree because it could not bear fruit. You're sitting under the tree all day. Where are you going with your life? I want to bear the fig tree. I can't get there from here. The fig tree is deceiving. It's the accursed fruit, the cursed tree, because he could not bear fruit. It could only provide shade. At best, people are looking for shade today. It could not give true refreshment and nourishment. Jesus comes to Nathanael, who is sitting under the fig tree, reading the prophet Micah about the Messiah coming from Bethlehem. He was quietly sitting in the shadow, without the full light of Christ and sanctifying grace, seeking. He is the prototype of the sincere contemplative seeker person, and Jesus comes and enters into a personal existential relationship with him. Nathanael is amazed that Jesus not only knows him, but he knows him as someone who has been sitting in the shade, sincerely seeking. In Buddhism, they have a beautiful saying. I used to give it to people to try and figure out. The Buddhist masters say, what was your face like before you were born? And I think as I've studied that, what the Buddhists are saying is a statement of faculty psychology. What was your soul like before you were born? So, I don't know if that works, but it works for me. Thank you.
Now we would like to welcome Patrick Carmack to give a paper on the diminished state of theological education and remedies proposed. Patrick Carmack is Doctor of Laws, a member of the U.S. Supreme Court Bar, and he is also the founder of the Angelicum Academy Homeschool Program and the Great Books Academy. Thank you.
Let me thank Peter for having this. When we spoke about it about 6 months ago, I said, I really don't think we ought to do anything on contemplative theology. So here we are. On the way here, there was an article. I don't know if any of you saw it. It's 10 hours and 39 minutes a day. That's how much time the typical American now spends on TV, the internet, cell phones, and so forth. That's 1 hour increased over the previous year. Obviously, it's approaching almost all of our waking hours. That's one of the real serious problems as to why contemplative theology is dying. And the mystical experience, including obviously Catholics, are affected by this virtually equally. So what I wanted to talk about a little bit was a diminished state of theological education. I wanted to limit that to mystical theology or spiritual theology, which, as Heather pointed out, is arguably it's a part of moral theology, what we must do, as opposed to what we must believe. I want to give a definition for it. There's several. Heather mentioned one by Jordan Allman, who taught at the Angelicum as a successor to Gary Goulegrange. This one is actually by Father Boyer, who passed away, but he wrote on mystical theology. Infused contemplation is a divinely given, and that's an important word, given, general, non-conceptual, loving awareness of God. There are no images, no concepts, no ideas, no visions. It is a divine mode of praying, not human. Sometimes this awareness takes the form of loving attention, a strong thirst for God, or a dry desire for God. And Merton goes into these three different ways that mystical prayer is experienced by people and by the same person over time. So that kind of prayer, since it's given and we cannot obtain it, is not the subject really of technique. So when we get into Eastern mysticism, we begin talking typically in Hinduism and so forth about techniques, and that's not really a Christian approach to it. Our Lord never really taught techniques, and I don't want to go into it. I'm just doing the preliminary sort of definition about it. But he didn't tell people, when they ask him, how do you pray? He gave them the Our Father. His example, if we have one of contemplative prayer, was when he would spend the night alone, praying to the Father. But we weren't told, take a certain position, hold your breath, or anything like that. So what can we learn about it? And if it's purely divinely given, can we have any role in promoting it, encouraging people toward contemplative prayer? And the premise there is contemplative prayer has a value for our society and actually for global peace. And in that, until we're, obviously, as we all know, until we're at peace ourselves, then our society's not going to be at peace. So history is just the story of each of us writ large, as we all know. So what can the role of us here, of other people, be in this? Well, this is from Teresa of Avila. Contemplation is preceded by an active focusing on the indwelling presence. It is the best way to prepare for the prayer of quiet. So she's recommending an active focusing on the indwelling presence. Well, my point there isn't really what she's saying. It's simply that you can say something. You can learn something about preparing for contemplation. You can't cause it. You can simply prepare for it. So when the Holy Spirit visits, and that's not up to us, the best we can do is be prepared, not be an obstacle. But we can teach people that. And the church has done that for many centuries. Let me read one quick thing. This is Father Boyer. It's related to this newspaper article. Everywhere I meet sincere people who are hungering for something deeper than what they hear in the Sunday homily. Over and over, men and women tell me that they'd never heard of contemplation in their parish churches, and rarely in retreats. In the latter, they may hear on occasion a few passing references to the subject, but nothing adequate. Repeatedly, I'm told that competent spiritual direction for growth in prayer is simply not available. It is no wonder that some of these people turn to faddish gurus, Occidental and Oriental. So what is the state? Why is that the case in our parishes? This is by Father Boyer again. The training of the clergy of our clergy now bears almost exclusively on work. There was a student who's writing his doctoral dissertation at a Catholic university, and it was on the curricula of Catholic seminaries. And what he found was the average seminary, however, this is dated, this was back in the 60s, so it's no doubt changed some, but the average seminary taught one course in spiritual theology, specifically as spiritual theology, a 3-hour course, and that's during the humanities, the philosophy, and theology. So they're really not exposed to it. Usually those are just survey courses. They cover very quickly what maybe Teresa of Avila or John of the Cross said. Seminaries rarely, if ever, have direct serious course attention to teaching students to dive deeply, to taste and see how good the Lord is. And yet Vatican II said that all of the faithful are obliged to holiness and to perfection in their state of life. Well, obviously it's difficult to reach perfection if you don't know anything about it, at least in the higher levels. And when we're talking perfection, we're talking automatically in the higher levels. I checked with 2 seminaries to see what they taught recently, just to see if the dissertation still had validity. Notre Dame Graduate Studies, they have 126 credits. They offer one course in spirituality of the priesthood. It's a 2-hour course, which is really not on contemplative theology, it's on spirituality in general, and one course in pastoral counseling, which really isn't germane. So basically one course, 2-hour credit. The Josephinum, 124 credits. They have one course in foundations of spirituality, which is good, and one on virtues, so ascetical life, and that's it. 2 courses, 6 hours. But interestingly, Holy Apostles offers 2 excellent courses. I was pleased to see one's called Mysticism of the Fathers, and then it's Mysticism of the Carmelites, that's excellent. That's very rare. If you want to learn about contemplative theology or mystical theology, there's very limited options apart from these one course things. One of them is the Teresianum in Rome. Unfortunately, it's in Italian, unfortunately for us. Now, they teach the Carmelite doctors, of course, John of the Cross, Teresa of Avila, and Teresa of Lisieux. And the Angelicum, and it's open to lay people, and they teach in English now, and they have an Institute of Spirituality, and lay people go there, and they actually can spend 2 years studying there. So that is available. However, it's in Rome, so it's obviously limited to a limited number of people. In the U.S., there's the Avila Institute, which is started by 2 laymen, Dr. Anthony Lillis and Dan Burke. However, it's not affiliated with any theological institute or seminary. And they basically say because it wouldn't work, because their work is sort of resisted or not understood. So this problem is a very real one in the church in terms of instructing our clergy, and then it fails to reach the lay people when we fail to instruct them. Heather mentioned Gary Goulegrange, and he had some things to say about it. He actually held the first chair in ascetical and mystical theology. This was also at the Angelicum. He held it for 51 years, actually. And it changed, I think, under Jordan Allman to spiritual theology. They changed the title of it. And now it's called the Institute of Spirituality. as I'm sure you all know, his great work was The Three Ages of the Interior Life. And this is what he said. For many adequate theological, this is about mainly seminaries. For many, adequate theological training is given by a manual, hence the name Manual Thomism, that can be studied in 3 years, and that when one does not feel impelled to reread it, because all that it contains is quickly exhausted. Who can claim that the perfection of theological culture is found in such a study? And then he talks about why souls with that kind of study rarely advance in the mystical life. Many souls are satisfied by relative perfection, which seems altogether insufficient for others, who seem to find peace only in lofty perfection. And he gives 4 reasons for this failure of even people who are aware of the mystical dimension. One is lack of proper direction, and Teresa of Avila and John of the Cross both complained about this problem in their day. Teresa of Avila suffered greatly from bad direction over and over again. Another one is lack of favorable circumstances, such as no availability to access this information. There's nobody teaching it. Another one is a nature given to exterior activities. And that's very common in Americans. We grow up in a culture like that. And finally, a mistaken belief that Christian perfection is meant for the few. And of course, Vatican II did address that in chapter 5 of Lumen Gentium. And interestingly, Heather, her talk is a wonderful theoretical discussion of this. And I'm going to end it shortly because we're running late, but on what the proposed solutions are by other people, specifically Dawson, Jacques Maritain, and Bob Delfino. Gary Lagrange spent most of his life refuting the notion that holiness was for the few, or the perfection of holiness was for the few. No one denies only a few attain it. The question is, are they called to it? And Vatican II made it very, very clear based on his teachings. So really, Gary Lagrange can take virtually all the credit for it, really. Although his teacher was Juan Arentero, who helped to revive it toward the beginning of the century, another Dominican. So that's where the remedy for that obstacle to studying mystical or contemplative theology for most people was provided. It's in that document. But it has, as noted in these seminary curricula, it hasn't done the job yet. It's not being taught. So the theory's there, we're in good shape there. We don't have the practical application of it to help people have a deeper spiritual life, and specifically contemplative. Just very briefly, I'm going to this problem isn't unique to our church now. It's happened many times in the past. I'll just mention a few of them right here real quickly, and I'll go into the remedies that are proposed by the people mentioned. Of course, the root of Gary Lagrange's teaching was the words of our Lord, "You must therefore be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect." Since, let's see, after the apostolic age and then the persecution of Emperor Decius in Egypt, all of the, many Catholics fled and went into the desert, and that began the Desert Fathers. Contemplative activity was widely recognized at that time as for anybody. In fact, people from all states of life fled to the desert, and it was written at the time that there were more people in the desert than in the cities soon. They were so attracted by this life despite its hardships. And of course, in the desert, it's automatically the ascetical life's more or less addressed. Later on, with the barbarian invasions in the 5th and to 8th centuries, this knowledge survived really only in the monasteries. It was pretty much lost. So that was a real nadir in contemplative theology. During the Carolingian Renaissance, Charlemagne called on the monks to teach the people not just theology, but also the arts and sciences. This is generally regarded as also a problem because it took them away from the contemplative life. in order to teach these other things. And there wasn't much written in that period, at all. But on contemplative theology, it's a side note that obviously they did great work in what they were doing, but it did have this negative effect. And so it indirectly contributed to the decline in contemplative life, which wasn't revived until the 11th century, when the Cistercians and the Carthusians were begun and began to rectify it. And shortly after that, you saw the flowering in Europe, and the Thomistic synthesis eventually that came out of that contemplative activity. You can see the beneficial effects of it in society, and the church has recognized that on numerous occasions. The nominalism of Occam and Luther, who declared he was an Occamist, began the next decline. Of course, it affected we lost the proper anthropological understanding of man. Later on, it was the study of contemplative theology or mystical theology was damaged by the reactions against Quietism and Gnosticism, both in France and Spain primarily. And the Inquisition was also obviously sometimes dealt too harshly with people who drifted into these areas, because it looked to people unfamiliar with it like Gnosticism. So that was a problem. However, at that same time, God raised up Teresa of Avila and John of the Cross. So finally, we had a well-defined Catholic mysticism through the works of those two doctors of the church. The Jansenists also were a problem to this day. I'm sure you're all aware there's still Jansenism in the church. It's never been fully eradicated, and they tend to have the view of the little church, the elite, the pure, that's reserved for the few, and they tend to be opposed to the notion of the universal call to holiness, at least in practice. And then most recently, what we dealt with in the last century, which we're still dealing with, is the reaction against the modernist, who suggested that the experiential side of mystical theology was really the only side that mattered. So they made religion a matter of religious sentiment and experience, which was often a sensualism. It wasn't mystical experience. And that was crushed under St. Pius X. I think it was Lamentabili, the encyclical. And Garrigou-Lagrange, even though he promoted the knowledge of contemplative theology, he also, he was kind of the gatekeeper. And so he was very careful to make sure that nothing of modernism, entered the church. It was kind of one of his roles, actually. So he was actually behind the placing on the index of one of his students, Yves Congar, who wrote about religious experience and so forth. And this touched in this dangerous area. So it said that Garrigou-Lagrange behind the scenes had advised the Pope to put this book on the index, and it was put on the index. Well, that put the kibosh on studies of that kind too. So what we wound up with was more of a syllogistic analysis of mystical theology, which Garrigou-Lagrange was an absolute expert at. But the experiential element of it, which is key to it, of course, was more or less crushed. And you couldn't talk about it, you couldn't write about it, and of course it's essential to it. So it became, again, a dry kind of a Thomism with respect to mystical theology. So what are the remedies? That brings us up to the current day and the last part of this short talk. And by the way, it's interesting, Garrigou-Lagrange, there's a story about, he used to give a talk on Sundays in Rome, which became part of, if you toured Rome as a Catholic, you'd try to go to this. It was in the Great Hall at the Angelicum, holds about 1,700 people. And he would preach for an hour or two, and it brought clerics and lay people from all over the world. And one Sunday he came out, he prepared his papers and all, he looked around and he said, "God is." And then he was struck dumb. It wasn't working. So he started over, arranged everything, started his lecture, "God is." And he couldn't say anything more. gathered up his papers and walked off. So the irony is he's the one stopping the discussion of the experiential side of it. And here before all of them, he demonstrated it in a sense. But the remedies, actually, we've heard two here, and I'm not really making fun of it because actually you're in agreement with Mariton on his. So we probably won't call them Delfino spiritual centers, but
They call them that.
but the two, and the other one was Bill's contemplative action groups, which is an interesting notion. The two, Mariton proposed this centers. Well, first off, back up one second. They recognized that this knowledge of contemplative theology was preserved in the monasteries through the Dark Ages up to the Middle Ages until the founding of the universities. Then the faculties of theology actually taught it as well. So you had two sources for this knowledge besides, the rare books at the time. And so it wasn't just one. It wasn't just the monasteries after the creation of the universities. So what Mariton, however, now we're in a different period. And we've traced the history very briefly there of where we are. So what do we do about it? Well, of course, it's absolutely true that Father Paul mentioned the witness of sanctity, which is obviously very, very important. And I'm glad he mentioned that. But to witness sanctity, we still have to hear about it. We have to learn about it. We have to learn what we can about it. And so for that, Jacques Maritain suggested these centers of spiritual enlightenment. And he defined them a bit. They would have a common life during some weeks to be trained in the way of the spiritual life and contemplation, and to learn the science of evangelical perfection, which is the highest part of theology. He suggested that what they would learn there would include the history, personality, and teaching of the great heroes of the faith and the mystics. These would be houses of hospitality and enlightenment. And some people, he suggested, should live there, make that their life's vocation, to assure the continuity of life and teaching in these schools. So that's his suggestion. So not a lot of detail. And obviously it bears some relationship both to a university and to a monastery. So he's trying to meld the two, and that's kind of his, I don't know that that's been done anywhere, but that was his suggestion. And then Christopher Dawson suggested, in dealing with exactly the same issue, something similar. He conceived the study of Christian culture, including mystical theology, to be the province of a special institute on the graduate level. He added it might be offered as a field of concentration to the student in the latter years of undergraduate study, so as a major. And a third possibility, he stated, was to found a special institute to train picked men and women in the study, in the preparation for the time when a more general course of teaching could be inaugurated. So there's 4 suggestions there. His is obviously closer simply to the university model. It doesn't have much of the elements of Mariton's sort of slightly more monastic approach. And so those are suggestions that we have. Peter and I talked about this some time ago, of trying to do something, trying to develop one of these ideas or some variation of it. And Pope Benedict said, in the modern age, we have new forms of Christian communities that haven't existed before, because as we're becoming a minority and are marginalized, that's going to happen. We're going to have to survive in different ways. So there may be something beyond these, obviously. So that's one of our objectives, and we're out of time now, and so I'll wrap it up here. But we wanted to have a discussion at some point, perhaps not at this conference. We're thinking of one maybe next year or something, or maybe it could be done through emails or whatever, to develop some kind of an idea that's practical, that can address this problem, and which is a really serious one. And obviously it needs some people who would be very devoted to this particular type of project. And so that's where we are. So thank you.
What time you and Steve going back tomorrow?
And we're not, we're going Monday.
You're going Monday, okay, well, we can talk about this tomorrow.
Yeah,
That's one
sure.
of the things that we were,
Okay.
Yeah.
you know, we've got, we might even take a trip out to the Hamptons.
Oh, yeah.
Talk about it out there.
Okay.
Yeah. It's like contemplation of all these.